How did one calm sentence at a family dinner turn into a man losing everything by morning? Why did my son tell me to leave his table, and why was he the one begging at my door the very next day? This is how being erased as not family forced me to act the only way left, quietly, legally, and without warning. The dining room felt smaller than usual that Tuesday evening, though nothing had physically changed. Same oak table my late wife Sarah had picked out 15 years ago, same mismatched chairs we'd collected over time, same warm lighting that made everything look softer than it really was. I stood in the doorway holding the takeout bags from Chen's garden, orange chicken and fried rice, Caleb's favorites since he was 12. "Dad's here," Mara called out, though she didn't look up from arranging napkins. My daughter-in-law had perfected the art of acknowledgement without engagement, a skill I'd watched her develop over the 3 years since she'd married my son. Caleb emerged from the kitchen carrying a pitcher of water, moving with the casual confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. At 29, he still had the lean build of the college athlete he'd once been, though the desk job had softened his edges. "Perfect timing," he said, setting the pitcher down. "We were just about to start." I placed the bags on the counter and began unpacking containers, the familiar ritual of family dinner. Hollis, my mother, sat in her usual spot near the window, her 76-year-old hands folded in her lap, watching everything with the quiet attention that had made her such a formidable school principal for 4 decades. "Smells good," she said, offering me one of her small, knowing smiles. The table was already set for 4. I counted automatically: Caleb, Mara, Hollis, and 1 empty setting. I reached for the stack of extra plates on the sideboard, the same motion I'd made dozens of times before. "Actually, Dad," Caleb's voice was calm, conversational, the tone he might use to comment on the weather. "The table's for family only tonight." The plate in my hand felt suddenly heavier. I looked at my son, searching his face for the joke, the smile that would indicate this was some kind of misunderstanding. His expression remained pleasant but firm, the same look he'd worn as a child when he'd made up his mind about something. Mara continued arranging silverware, her movements precise and unhurried. She didn't look at me, but I caught the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, but close enough. "Family only," I repeated, my voice level. "Yeah." Caleb sat down in his chair, reaching for the water pitcher. "You understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that the man who'd called me 3 times last week asking for help with his car payment had just told me I wasn't family. I understood that the woman who'd never once thanked me for the rent money that kept this roof over her head was now watching me with barely concealed satisfaction. I understood that my own mother was sitting at this table, her jaw tight with disapproval, but not for me. The takeout containers sat open on the counter, steam still rising from the orange chicken. $42.37, plus tip. I'd stopped at Chen's garden after 10 hours operating a crane at the construction site, still wearing my work clothes, still tasting concrete dust. I set the plate back on the sideboard with the same careful precision Mara used for her silverware. No sound, no crack of ceramic, no dramatic gesture. Just a plate returning to its stack. "Well then," I said. Caleb was already serving himself rice, the conversation apparently over in his mind. Mara had moved on to folding napkins into perfect triangles. Only Hollis watched me, her dark eyes holding something that might have been apology or might have been warning. I walked to the counter and began closing the takeout containers, snapping the cardboard lids back into place. The orange chicken went back in its box, the fried rice sealed away, the spring rolls tucked into their paper sleeve. $42.37 plus tip. "Dad?" Caleb's voice carried a note of confusion, as if he couldn't understand why I was packing up the food he'd just excluded me from sharing. I picked up the bags and turned toward the door. 3 faces looked at me from the table, Caleb puzzled, Mara carefully neutral, Hollis quietly furious. The 4th chair sat empty, waiting for family. "Enjoy your dinner," I said. The hallway felt longer than usual, my footsteps echoing off hardwood floors that I'd helped Caleb install last spring. The front door opened easily under my hand, the evening air cool against my face. Behind me, the house stayed warm and bright, full of family having dinner. I waited on the front porch for 30 seconds, maybe 45. Long enough for someone to follow, to call my name, to say this had all been some kind of mistake. Long enough for my son to remember that I was his father, or for my mother to remind him. The door stayed closed. I walked to my truck, placed the takeout bags on the passenger seat, and drove home to my apartment. In my rearview mirror, the house grew smaller until it disappeared entirely, just another warm light in a neighborhood full of families having dinner. My apartment felt larger when I returned. Though at 800 square feet, it was barely a quarter the size of the house I'd just left. The house where Caleb and Mara lived. The house whose mortgage I'd been helping with for 18 months. I set the takeout bags on my kitchen counter and opened my laptop, the screen casting blue light across the small space. The banking app loaded quickly. I'd been checking it more frequently lately, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe some part of me had been preparing for this moment without realizing it. The numbers told a story I'd been avoiding for months. Auto pay to Riverside Property Management, $1,850 monthly. That was Caleb's rent. Pacific Gas and Electric, account ending in 4471, $180 average. Their utilities. Progressive Insurance, policyholder Caleb Vanton, $247 monthly. His car insurance, the one I'd co-signed because his credit wasn't quite good enough on its own. I scrolled through 3 months of statements, watching my money flow out in neat, automated streams. Rent, utilities, insurance, groceries when things got tight, car repairs when his Honda needed work. A steady hemorrhage of support that had become so routine I'd stopped thinking about it as a choice. The orange chicken was still warm. I ate it standing at the counter, looking out my single window at the parking lot below. $42.37, plus tip. For food I'd been told I couldn't share, bought for people who'd just informed me I wasn't family. My phone buzzed. A text from Caleb. "Thanks for dinner. Next time maybe call first." I stared at the message for a long time, reading it over and over until the words stopped making sense. Thanks for dinner. The dinner I hadn't been allowed to eat. Next time, maybe call first. To ask permission to attend family dinner, to request a seat at a table in a house I was paying for. I didn't respond. The next morning at the crane yard, I sat in the break room with my coffee and yesterday's newspaper, listening to the usual pre-shift conversations. Tommy Valdez was complaining about his teenager's car insurance, how the rates were bleeding him dry. Maria Santos mentioned her daughter moving back home after college, the extra mouth to feed. "At least she's grateful," said Frank Morrison, our crew chief. "My brother-in-law's been living in my basement for 6 months, acts like I owe him something. Dependence gets expensive, you know, especially when they start thinking it's permanent." Frank wasn't talking to me specifically, wasn't even looking in my direction, but his words hit like a physical blow, the casual truth of someone who'd never had to think carefully about what he was saying. Dependence gets expensive, especially when they start thinking it's permanent. I folded the newspaper and threw away my coffee cup, the taste suddenly bitter. Outside, the morning was clear and cold, the kind of day that made the city look sharp and clean. I climbed into the crane cab and spent 8 hours moving steel beams with mechanical precision, each lift and placement exactly where it needed to be. At lunch, I sat in my truck and opened the banking app again. The numbers hadn't changed, but my perspective had. This wasn't generosity. It was a subscription service. Monthly payments for the privilege of being tolerated at family gatherings. Rent on a relationship that could be revoked without notice. I thought about Sarah, about what she would have said if she could see this. She'd always been direct, sometimes brutally so. "Orion," she would have said. You're paying for a seat at a table, not earning a place in a family. She would have been right. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from Mara. Caleb's car is making that noise again. Can you take a look this weekend? I stared at the text, remembering Caleb's calm voice from the night before. Family only. But apparently, when the Honda needed work, I was family enough. When the rent was due, when the utilities needed paying, when the insurance premium came around, suddenly I was family enough. I deleted the message without responding. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and 3 months of bank statements, adding up the true cost of my son's love. Rent, utilities, insurance, groceries, car repairs, the occasional emergency loan that was never quite paid back. The number was larger than I'd expected, larger than I'd allowed myself to calculate before. $1,850 for rent, $180 average for utilities, $247 for insurance. The smaller amounts, groceries, gas money, the 20 here and 40 there that added up faster than I'd realized. In 3 months, I'd spent more on Caleb's life than I'd spent on my own. And last night, he'd told me the table was for family only. I closed the laptop and sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, listening to the sounds of other people's lives through thin walls. A television somewhere, a couple arguing, a child crying briefly before being comforted. Normal sounds of normal families, living in spaces they could afford, eating food they'd bought with their own money. Tomorrow, I decided, things would be different. Not dramatically different. I'd learned long ago that quiet changes lasted longer than loud ones. But different enough that the next time someone told me I wasn't family, I'd be able to agree with them completely. The thought brought an unexpected sense of relief, like setting down a weight I'd been carrying so long, I'd forgotten it was there. Thursday morning brought rain and the kind of gray sky that made everything look unfinished. I sat in my truck in the Crane Yard parking lot, engine running, heater fighting the October chill. My phone showed 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes before my shift started. 13 minutes to make a decision I'd been circling around for 2 days. The banking app opened with a soft chime. There they were, lined up like soldiers, the automatic payments that would process in less than 6 hours. Riverside Property Management due today. Pacific Gas and Electric scheduled for tomorrow. Progressive Insurance set to renew over the weekend. A neat row of financial obligations that had nothing to do with me anymore, apparently. I scrolled to my calendar app. October 15th. Auto pay renewal, insurance. October 16th. Rent due. October 18th. PG&E billing cycle. Reminders. I'd set months ago, back when I'd thought organization and reliability meant something to the people I was organizing and being reliable for. Family only. The words had been echoing in my head for 48 hours, bouncing around like a song you can't stop humming. Not said in anger, not shouted during an argument where things get said that don't really mean anything. Said calmly, matter-of-factly, the way you'd tell someone the store was closed or the weather was changing. I opened my contacts and scrolled to Grant Holloway's number. Grant had been our family lawyer since Sarah passed, handling the estate paperwork and insurance claims with a level of steady competence that made difficult situations manageable. He'd also taken care of the co-signing paperwork when Caleb needed help with his apartment lease, and had explained the legal implications of adding my name to various accounts and obligations. The phone rang twice before Grant's voice came through, professional but warm. "Orion, good morning. What can I do for you?" "I need to remove myself from some financial obligations," I said. "Today, if possible." A pause. Grant was good at reading between lines, had probably heard this tone before from other clients in other situations. "What kind of obligations are we talking about?" "Co-signed lease, joint utility accounts, insurance policies where I'm the primary, all involving my son." Another pause, longer this time. "Are we talking about a dispute or a change in circumstances?" I watched rain streak down the windshield, distorting the view of the construction site beyond. Men were arriving for work, carrying lunchboxes and coffee cups, preparing for another day of building things that would last longer than the relationships that built them. Change in circumstances, I said. I see. How quickly do you need this to happen? Today. This morning, if possible. Grant's keyboard clicked in the background. I can clear my schedule for 10:30. Bring any paperwork you have. Lease agreements, insurance policies, account information. We'll need to review everything carefully to make sure we do this properly. Properly? Legal obligations can't just disappear, Orion, but they can be transferred, modified, or terminated according to the terms of the original agreements. We'll find the cleanest way to extract you from anything you don't want to be part of anymore. After I hung up, I sat in the truck for the remaining 8 minutes of my break, watching my coworkers disappear into the site office for the morning briefing. Normal men with normal problems, complaining about normal things like overtime and whether the coffee was strong enough. None of them, I was willing to bet, had been told they weren't family by someone whose rent they were paying. At 10:30, I sat across from Grant in his downtown office, a stack of papers between us like evidence in a trial. Lease agreements, insurance policies, bank account authorizations, utility account modifications, the paper trail of 2 years spent trying to help my son build a stable life. Grant read through everything with the careful attention he brought to all legal documents, occasionally making notes on a yellow pad. His office was quiet except for the scratch of his pen and the distant hum of traffic 15 floors below. This is straightforward, he said finally. You're not obligated to continue any of these arrangements. The lease has a co-signer release clause that can be activated with 30 days' notice, but the landlord can also choose to accept the primary tenant's solo responsibility immediately if their income meets requirements. And if it doesn't? Then Caleb will need to find a new place to live, or find a different co-signer. Grant's voice was neutral, professional. The utilities can be transferred immediately. They're month-to-month services. The insurance is more complex because you're the primary policy holder, but we can cancel and he can obtain his own coverage. I nodded. How long does all this take? The paperwork? A few hours? The actual changes? Most can be effective immediately, some within 24 to 48 hours. Grant set down his pen and looked at me directly. Orion, are you sure about this? Once we start this process, it's going to create immediate financial pressure for Caleb. I'm sure. And you're prepared for his reaction? I thought about Tuesday night, about sitting in my apartment eating takeout I'd bought for people who'd decided I wasn't family. About 18 months of automatic payments flowing out of my account to support people who apparently saw me as a service provider rather than a father. I'm prepared. Grant nodded and picked up his phone. Let me start making some calls. By noon, I was sitting in the Pacific Commerce Bank branch on 5th Street, across from Leanne Price, the account manager who'd helped me set up the automatic payments that were about to stop existing. Leanne was efficient and professional, the kind of person who could process major life changes with the same calm demeanor she'd use to update an address. So you want to cancel all automatic payments to these accounts, she said, reading from Grant's list, and remove authorization for any secondary users to access funds. That's right. I can do that immediately. The changes will be effective as of close of business today. Leanne's fingers moved across her keyboard with practiced efficiency. Any pending payments scheduled for today will be canceled. Any future scheduled payments will be stopped. What about the accounts themselves? Joint accounts will be converted to individual accounts under your name only. Secondary users will lose access immediately. She paused, looking up from her screen. Mr. Vanton, are you sure you want to do this? These changes can't be undone without re-establishing all the original authorizations. I'm sure. All right then. More typing, the quiet sound of a life being reorganized with keystrokes and mouse clicks. You'll receive email confirmations for all changes within the hour. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I sat in my truck in the bank parking lot afterward, reading the confirmation emails as they arrived, payment cancellation notices, account modification confirmations, authorization removals. Each email a small act of independence, a quiet declaration that I was no longer available for financial exploitation by people who'd decided I wasn't family. My phone showed 1:47 p.m. In approximately 4 hours, Caleb's rent payment would fail to process. Tomorrow, his utilities would be disconnected. Over the weekend, his car insurance would lapse, and I would be having dinner at my own table, in my own apartment, eating food I'd bought with money that was actually mine. The thought should have brought satisfaction, but instead I felt something closer to emptiness. Not regret. I was certain about that, but a kind of hollow finality, like closing a door you'd never be able to open again. I started the truck and drove back to work, where I spent the afternoon moving steel beams with the same mechanical precision I'd brought to dismantling my son's financial security. Each lift and placement exactly where it needed to be, no wasted motion, no unnecessary drama, just quiet, methodical work that would be finished by the end of the day. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything look newly defined. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and the stack of papers Grant had prepared, each document representing another severed connection. Lease co-signer removal forms, utility account transfer requests, insurance policy cancellations, the bureaucratic architecture of independence. My phone had been silent since Wednesday. No texts from Caleb about his car making noises, no calls from Mara about household emergencies that somehow required my immediate financial attention. The silence felt strange after months of constant low-level demands, like the absence of a sound you hadn't realized was bothering you until it stopped. Grant had scheduled appointments throughout the morning, 3 stops to complete the process he'd started yesterday. Riverside Property Management first, then Pacific Gas and Electric, finally Progressive Insurance. A tour of institutions that had treated me as a convenient source of money for people who'd apparently never considered me family. The property management office occupied the ground floor of a glass building downtown, all modern furniture and motivational posters about building communities. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup and a practiced smile, directed me to a small conference room where I waited for the manager. "Mr. Vanton," said Rebecca Chen, settling into the chair across from me with a thick folder. "I understand you want to discuss the lease for Unit 247 on Riverside Drive. I want to remove myself as co-signer." Rebecca opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. "I see. And the primary tenant, that's your son Caleb, is he aware of this change?" "He will be." "I see." Rebecca's tone remained professional, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes. She'd handled these conversations before, knew the family dynamics that usually preceded them. "Well, let me review the current situation." She pulled out a computer printout covered in numbers and dates. "The lease has 14 months remaining. Current monthly rent is $1,850 with the co-signer, that's you, providing payment backup and credit guarantee. Primary tenant income is..." She paused, checking another document. $2,100 monthly gross from Westfield Marketing Solutions. I did the math automatically. $2,100 gross probably meant $1,600 take-home, maybe less. Not enough to cover $1,850 rent plus utilities, food, car payment, insurance, and everything else that came with being a functioning adult. "Can the lease continue without a co-signer?" I asked. Rebecca consulted her papers again. "Not with the primary tenant's current income. Our requirement is that monthly gross income equal at least 3 times the rent amount. Mr. Caleb Vanton would need to earn approximately $5,550 monthly to qualify independently." "So what happens now?" "He has 30 days to find a new co-signer who meets our credit and income requirements, or to find alternative housing. Rebecca's voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone who delivered bad news regularly. "We'll send official notification today." I signed the co-signer removal forms with the same careful precision I used for crane operation reports. Clear, legible, final. Rebecca processed the paperwork with efficient professionalism, occasionally asking for initials or clarification. Within 20 minutes, I was no longer legally responsible for my son's housing. The Pacific Gas and Electric office was busier, full of people paying bills and arguing about meter readings and requesting service transfers. I took a number and waited in a plastic chair, watching other customers navigate the bureaucracy of modern utilities. "Account number?" asked the clerk when my number was finally called. I handed her the paperwork Grant had prepared. "I want to remove my name from this account and stop all automatic payments." The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and infinite patience, typed the account number into her system. "I show this is a joint account with automatic payment from," she checked her screen, "Pacific Commerce Bank, account ending in 7834. "That's right. I want both removed." "Okay." More typing. The soft click of keys processing another family dissolution. "I can remove you from the account immediately, but the remaining account holder will need to establish new payment arrangements within 10 business days, or service will be suspended." "How long does that take?" "Suspension, 5 days after the payment deadline, so if the next bill isn't paid by the due date, service stops 5 days later." She looked up from her screen. "Should I proceed?" "Yes." The insurance office was the most complicated stop, partly because I was the primary policy holder rather than just a co-signer. The agent, a nervous young man named Derek who looked like he'd started working there approximately last week, spent 20 minutes consulting with supervisors and reading policy documents. "So you want to cancel the policy entirely?" Derek asked for the third time. "That's right." "And the vehicle owner, that's Caleb Vanton, he's aware that coverage will end immediately?" "He will be." Derek consulted his computer screen again, probably hoping the information had changed in the last 2 minutes. "Well, I can process the cancellation, but I have to inform you that driving without insurance is illegal in this state. Mr. Caleb Vanton will need to obtain new coverage immediately to avoid legal issues." "I understand." "And there's no refund for unused premium time, since the policy is being canceled by request rather than for non-payment." "I understand." Derek printed out cancellation forms and walked me through each signature line, explaining terms and conditions and legal implications with the thoroughness of someone who'd been trained to avoid lawsuits. By the time I left his office, Caleb's car insurance would expire at midnight. I drove home through afternoon traffic, past billboards advertising family restaurants and furniture stores and vacation destinations, all the commercial infrastructure of normal family life. At red lights, I watched other drivers talking on phones, probably coordinating dinner plans or soccer practice or the 1,000 small obligations that held families together. My phone remained silent. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the confirmation emails that had been arriving all day. Account modifications processed, automatic payments canceled, co-signer responsibilities terminated, insurance policies canceled. Each email a small bureaucratic victory, a quiet assertion that my money belonged to me unless I explicitly decided otherwise. I ordered Chinese food from Chen's Garden, orange chicken and fried rice, the same meal I'd bought Tuesday night for people who'd told me I wasn't family. This time I ate it at my own table, in my own apartment, with my own money. It tasted better than I'd expected. At 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with the first message I'd received from Caleb in 3 days. "Dad, my rent payment got declined. Can you check your account? Might be a bank error." I read the message twice, then set the phone aside, without responding. Tomorrow would bring more messages, probably phone calls, eventually panic as the full scope of the changes became clear. But tonight, for the first time in 18 months, I went to sleep knowing that my money was mine, my obligations were my own, and my family was exactly the size I chose it to be. The last thing I saw before closing my eyes was the stack of cancellation confirmations on my nightstand, each document a small piece of independence quietly reclaimed. Saturday morning brought the kind of silence I'd forgotten existed. No phone calls about emergency car repairs, no texts about utility bills or grocery money, or the dozen small financial crises that had punctuated my weekends for the past year and a half. Just coffee, newspaper, and the peaceful knowledge that my bank account balance was exactly what I'd left it. I spread the paperwork across my kitchen table like a general reviewing battle plans. Lease cosigner removal, processed. Utility account transfers, complete. Insurance cancellations, effective as of midnight Friday. Bank authorizations, revoked. Each document represented a small act of independence, a quiet reclamation of autonomy I'd surrendered so gradually I'd barely noticed it disappearing. My phone showed 7 missed calls from Caleb and 3 from Mara, all from late Friday night after the insurance cancellation would have appeared in whatever app he used to track his coverage. I'd turned the ringer off before bed, preferring to sleep through his discovery rather than manage his panic in real time. The messages could wait. Today, I had one more stop to make. Hale still lived in the same small house she'd bought 15 years earlier after my father passed, a tidy bungalow with a garden that somehow looked immaculate in every season. I found her in the kitchen, as I'd known I would, drinking tea and reading a book about something I'd never heard of. At 76, my mother maintained the same intellectual curiosity that had made her such a formidable principal, the same quiet intensity that could make grown men reconsider their life choices. "Orion," she said, looking up from her book, "I wondered when you'd come by." I poured myself coffee from the pot she always kept ready and sat across from her at the small table. Through the window I could see her neighbor watering his lawn with the methodical precision of a man who'd found peace in routine. "You didn't say anything Tuesday night," I said. "Neither did you." Hollis closed her book and gave me the same steady attention she'd used to extract confessions from guilty students. "Though I suspect you've been saying quite a lot since then, just not with words." She always knew, had always been able to read the spaces between what people said, to understand the decisions they were making before they fully understood them themselves. It was a gift that had made her an extraordinary educator and occasionally an uncomfortable mother. "He told me I wasn't family," I said. "I was there. At a table in a house I helped pay for, eating food I bought. I was there for that too." Hollis sipped her tea, waiting. She'd perfected the art of silence, knew that people would fill quiet spaces with truth if you gave them enough time. "I've been thinking about what Sarah would say. And what would she say?" I considered the question, remembering my wife's particular brand of direct honesty. Sarah had never been cruel, but she'd never been gentle when gentleness enabled bad behavior. She'd loved Caleb fiercely, but had also been the one to set boundaries when he'd tried to manipulate or take advantage. She'd say I was paying for a relationship instead of having one. She would. Hollis nodded. She'd also say that children who don't learn consequences don't learn anything else either. We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the neighbor complete his lawn watering ritual. Normal Saturday morning activities for normal families, the kind of peaceful routine that came with living within your means and maintaining relationships based on something more substantial than financial convenience. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Hollis asked. "What comes next?" "The anger, the accusations, the attempts to make you feel guilty for stopping something you should never have started." She set down her teacup with the careful precision she brought to all her movements. "Caleb is going to be furious when he realizes what you've done. Mara will be worse." "I know." "They'll say you're abandoning them. They'll say you're being cruel and unreasonable. They'll probably tell other people that you've lost your mind or that you're having some kind of breakdown." I'd been expecting this conversation, had known that my mother would want to prepare me for the emotional warfare that was probably already beginning. She'd seen enough family dysfunction in her years as an educator to recognize the patterns, to predict how people would behave when their comfortable arrangements were disrupted. "They'll also come here," she continued. "They'll want me to talk sense into you, to convince you to restore their financial support. They'll expect me to take their side." "And will you?" Hollis smiled, the same small, knowing expression she'd worn Tuesday night when Caleb had told me the table was for family only. "Orion, you're 54 years old. You've been supporting yourself since you were 18 and supporting others since you were 25. If you've decided to stop paying for the privilege of being tolerated by people who should love you unconditionally, I suspect you have excellent reasons." That's not exactly an answer. It's the only answer that matters. She reached across the table and patted my hand with the same gentle firmness she'd used when I was 8 and learning difficult lessons about fairness and consequences. "You're my son. Not because you pay my bills or solve my problems or make my life easier. You're my son because you're my son, and that doesn't change based on your usefulness." I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying since Tuesday night without fully recognizing it. The fear that extracting myself from Caleb's financial life would somehow make me less of a father, less worthy of love or respect or consideration. My mother's quiet certainty reminded me that real family relationships didn't require monthly subscription fees. "What if I'm wrong?" I asked. "What if this destroys whatever relationship we have left?" "Then it wasn't much of a relationship to begin with." Hollis's voice carried the gentle authority of someone who'd spent decades helping people distinguish between what they wanted to believe and what was actually true. "Love that depends on money isn't love, Orion. It's a business arrangement." We talked for another hour, covering practical matters and emotional preparations. She promised to call if Caleb or Mara tried to involve her, warned me that the next few days would probably be difficult, reminded me that doing the right thing rarely felt comfortable in the moment. When I finally left her house, my phone showed 14 missed calls and 23 text messages. I didn't read them, didn't listen to the voicemails, didn't engage with whatever escalating panic was building in the digital space between my son's financial crisis and his unwillingness to accept responsibility for his own life. Instead, I drove home and spent the afternoon organizing my apartment, filing away the paperwork from yesterday's institutional visits, preparing for whatever confrontation was coming. I made dinner, watched a movie, read a book I'd been meaning to finish for months. Normal Saturday activities for a normal man living within his means, maintaining relationships based on something more substantial than financial obligation. At 10:30 p.m., just as I was getting ready for bed, someone knocked on my door. Not the polite tap of a neighbor or the official rhythm of delivery services, but the urgent, insistent pounding of someone who'd run out of other options. I looked through the peephole and saw Caleb standing in the hallway, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, his hair uncombed and his expression somewhere between panic and rage. Behind him, barely visible in the hallway's dim lighting, Mara stood with her arms crossed, her face set in the kind of cold fury I'd seen her use on customer service representatives and parking attendants. I opened the door. Caleb looked like he hadn't slept in 24 hours. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and his eyes held the particular wildness that came with watching a comfortable life collapse without warning. Behind him, Mara stood with the rigid posture of someone barely containing explosive anger. "Dad!" Caleb's voice cracked slightly on the word. "We need to talk." I stepped aside to let them in, noting how they moved through my small apartment like investigators examining a crime scene. Mara's eyes swept across my kitchen table, probably looking for evidence of whatever mental breakdown she'd decided explained my recent behavior. Caleb went directly to my living room window, staring out at the parking lot as if the view might contain answers. "Coffee?" I asked. "This isn't a social visit." Mara said, her voice carrying the clipped precision she used when she was preparing for battle. We need to understand what's happening. I poured myself coffee anyway, taking my time with the ritual while they arranged themselves in my small living space. Caleb finally sat on the edge of my couch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Mara remained standing, positioned near the door like she was planning a quick escape. My rent payment bounced, Caleb said, and my insurance got canceled, and PG&E says our account is being transferred. He looked up at me with the expression he'd worn as a child when he couldn't understand why his toys had stopped working. What's going on? I sat in my single armchair, the one piece of furniture I'd bought for myself after Sarah was gone. I removed myself from your financial obligations. You what? The co-signing, the automatic payments, the joint accounts. I ended all of it. Caleb stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Why would you do that? Because I'm not family. The words hung in the air between us, simple and clear and impossible to misunderstand. Caleb's face went through several expressions: confusion, recognition, denial, before settling on something that looked like genuine shock. Dad, what are you talking about? Tuesday night, your dinner table, family only, you said. That was... Caleb gestured vaguely, searching for words that would make this reasonable. That was just... We wanted some privacy, some time with just us. Family only, I repeated. Mara stepped forward, her patience apparently exhausted. This is ridiculous. You're going to destroy Caleb's credit, cost us our apartment, leave us with no insurance, all because of some misunderstanding about dinner. No misunderstanding, I said. You were very clear. The table was for family only. I respected that decision. By cutting off our rent? Mara's voice rose, the careful control slipping. By canceling our insurance and utilities? What kind of person does that? I sipped my coffee, considering her question. The kind of person who isn't family, apparently. Caleb stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. Okay, fine. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I hurt your feelings. But Dad, this is our life you're messing with. Our apartment, our bills, Your life, I said. Your apartment. Your bills. You know I can't afford the rent on my own. I know. So what am I supposed to do? The question hung between us, heavy with implications neither of us wanted to examine too closely. What was he supposed to do? Get a better job, find a cheaper apartment, live within his means, take responsibility for the life he'd built on someone else's foundation. All the things adults did when they couldn't rely on parents to subsidize their choices. I don't know, I said, but it's not my problem anymore. Mara made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a snarl. Not your problem? He's your son. Is he? I looked at Caleb, who was still pacing like a caged animal. Because Tuesday night, you made it pretty clear that I wasn't your father, at least not when it came to family dinners. That's not what I meant. What did you mean? Caleb stopped pacing, his face flushed with frustration and something that might have been embarrassment. I meant... We just wanted... Mara had made this nice dinner, and we wanted some quiet time with Grandma, and I wasn't invited because I'm not family. You're twisting this around. Am I? I set down my coffee cup and looked at both of them, these two people who'd been living off my money while treating me like an inconvenience. Help me understand, Caleb. When am I family and when am I not? He opened his mouth, then closed it, apparently realizing the trap he'd walked into. Am I family when the rent is due? I continued. When your car needs repairs? When the insurance premium comes around? Or am I only not family when you want privacy at dinner? Dad. Because I'm confused about the rules. When exactly do I qualify as family, and when am I just a convenient source of money? Mara stepped forward again, her face tight with anger. You're being manipulative and cruel. We never said you weren't family. Family only. I said for the third time. Those were the exact words. It was one dinner. It was every dinner, every family gathering, every holiday, every occasion where I was tolerated because I was useful, but never actually wanted because I belonged. I stood up, suddenly tired of this conversation. You want to know what's cruel, Mara? Cruel is paying for a relationship. Cruel is buying your way into family gatherings. Cruel is watching your son treat you like a service provider and pretending it's normal. Caleb's face had gone pale. That's not... I don't treat you like... When's the last time you called me just to talk? When's the last time you invited me to dinner without needing money first? When's the last time you acted like you wanted me around instead of just needing me around? The silence stretched long enough for all of us to hear the neighbor's television through the thin walls, the distant sound of other people's normal Saturday night entertainment. This is insane, Mara said finally. You're going to ruin our lives over hurt feelings. I'm not ruining anything. I'm just not paying for it anymore. Same thing? Exactly. I looked at her, this woman who'd never once thanked me for keeping her lights on and her rent paid. If me not paying for your life ruins your life, then your life was already ruined. You just hadn't noticed yet. Caleb slumped back onto the couch, his head in his hands. Dad, please. I'm sorry about Tuesday night. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. But we can't lose the apartment. We can't afford to start over. Then you should have thought about that before you decided I wasn't family. I never decided that. You did. Tuesday night, in front of your wife and your grandmother, you decided that I wasn't family enough to sit at a table in a house I helped pay for. I walked to the door, my hand on the knob. I'm just agreeing with you. Mara followed me, her voice sharp with desperation. So that's it? You're going to let your own son become homeless because of one stupid comment? I'm not letting anything happen. I'm just not preventing it anymore. What kind of father does that? I opened the door, cool night air flowing into the warm apartment. The kind who isn't family, apparently. They left without saying goodbye, Mara's heels clicking angrily down the hallway, Caleb trailing behind like a man walking toward an outcome he already knew he couldn't escape. I watched from my doorway until they disappeared into the elevator, then closed the door and turned the deadbolt. My apartment felt larger somehow, as if removing two people had created more space than their physical presence had occupied. I finished my coffee standing at the kitchen window, looking out at a parking lot full of cars belonging to people who lived within their means and maintained relationships based on something more substantial than financial convenience. My phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. Dad, please, we can work this out. I deleted the message without responding. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more texts, probably more visits. There would be family meetings and interventions and attempts to make me feel guilty for stopping something I should never have started. Hollis had warned me about all of it, had prepared me for the emotional warfare that began when comfortable arrangements were disrupted. But tonight, for the first time in 18 months, I went to sleep knowing that my money belonged to me, my obligations were my own, and my family was exactly the size I chose it to be. The last sound I heard before sleep was the deadbolt clicking into place, a small mechanical confirmation that some doors, once closed, were meant to stay that way. In the morning, the knocking would stop. The desperate calls would eventually end. The family group chat would move on to other crises, other sources of support, other people willing to pay for the privilege of being tolerated. And Orion Vanton would wake up in his small apartment, make his own coffee, and begin the quiet work of building a life based on relationships that didn't require subscription fees. Family, it turned out, was not about shared ties or obligation or living under the same roof. It was about respect. And respect, unlike rent, could not be bought.